music. What if I told you that the real barrier between you and mastering any subject isn't your IQ, your background, or your natural talent, but the strategy you use to learn? Most people grow up believing that learning is about stuffing their minds with information. They think success in school or skill building comes from memorizing definitions, repeating formulas, and cramming facts the night before a test. But the individuals who truly master subjects, who understand them deeply and use them creatively, approach learning in a completely different way. There is a method so straightforward that it almost seems too obvious to matter. Yet this simple approach has the power to push knowledge far beyond surface-level memory and into genuine understanding. It transforms learning from passive storage into active comprehension. And the fascinating part is this: it is not reserved for geniuses. Anyone can use it. Think about one of the greatest scientific minds of the modern era. He wasn't famous for speaking in complicated jargon or hiding ideas behind complex equations, though he certainly understood them. What made him extraordinary was his ability to take the most intricate concepts in physics and explain them in plain language. He could describe abstract phenomena as if he were telling a simple story to a child. That talent wasn't just a communication skill, it was proof of deep understanding, and that ability reveals the true secret of mastery. Mastery does not depend on raw intelligence. It depends on a specific mental habit, a disciplined process of thinking that forces your brain to clarify and reorganize information. When you use this process, you don't just remember ideas temporarily. You reshape them in your own mind until they make sense at their core. And once something truly makes sense to you, it becomes much harder to forget. Here's the surprising truth. You can apply this exact method to learn anything: a new language, advanced mathematics, physics, business strategy, programming, even skills that feel completely beyond your reach right now. The secret is not grinding through endless hours of mindless repetition. It is not memorizing paragraphs word for word. Instead, it is about compelling your brain to simplify, connect, and reconstruct knowledge in a way that locks it into long-term understanding. Your brain is not designed to act as a storage warehouse for random facts. It is designed to detect patterns, build connections, and create meaning. When you learn in a way that supports those natural strengths, learning becomes dramatically more effective. When you ignore them and rely only on memorization, progress feels slow and frustrating. So what is this powerful technique? It begins with a shift in mindset. Imagine you are about to study something difficult, maybe calculus, economics, coding, or a foreign language. Most people approach such a subject with anxiety. They think, there's so much information, I need to memorize all of this. That assumption is the first mistake. Instead of starting with memorization, start with simplification. Take the concept you want to learn and try to explain it in the simplest possible terms. Pretend you must teach it to someone who has no background in the subject. Remove jargon. Strip away technical language. Break the idea down into small, clear pieces. If you cannot explain it simply, that is a sign you do not fully understand it yet. This is where the real learning happens. When you attempt to simplify a concept, your brain is forced to identify gaps in your understanding. You quickly notice where your explanation becomes fuzzy or where you rely on memorized phrases without truly grasping their meaning. Those weak spots are not failures, they are opportunities. They show you exactly what you need to revisit and clarify. Next, return to the material. Study only the parts that confused you. Strengthen your understanding there. Then attempt to explain the idea again in simple language. Repeat this process as many times as necessary. Each cycle deepens your comprehension. This method works because it transforms you from a passive receiver of information into an active processor of knowledge. Instead of copying notes or rereading chapters, you are engaging your brain in reconstruction. You are reorganizing information in your own words, forming connections that are unique to your understanding. That act of reconstruction makes learning durable. There is another powerful element to this approach: teaching. When you explain a concept out loud, even if no one is listening, you activate a different level of clarity. Teaching forces structure. It forces coherence. You cannot hide behind vague ideas when you are trying to explain something clearly. If you stumble, you immediately know where you need more work. Over time, this habit rewires how you approach learning. You stop chasing memorization and start chasing clarity. You measure progress not by how many pages you covered, but by how simply and confidently you can explain the material. And something remarkable begins to happen. Subjects that once felt intimidating become manageable. Complex ideas start to feel connected rather than chaotic. You realize that difficulty often comes not from the subject itself, but from the way you approached it. This method also builds confidence. When you can explain something in simple terms, you feel ownership over it. It is no longer mysterious or overwhelming. It becomes part of your thinking. That sense of ownership is what separates temporary learners from true masters. By the end of this process, you will begin to see your brain differently. It is not a limited container that fills up and forgets. It is an adaptable system designed to simplify and integrate information. When you use it correctly, learning becomes faster, deeper, and more enjoyable. So the next time you face a challenging subject, resist the urge to memorize immediately. Start by simplifying. Break the concept down. Explain it as if to a child. Identify the gaps. Refine your understanding. Repeat. You may discover that mastering any subject is not about being born brilliant. It is about using a method that forces real understanding. And once you adopt that process, mastery is no longer a distant possibility. It becomes an inevitable result of how you learn. Choose one single concept, just music 1. Write down what you understood on a sheet of paper as if you were explaining it to a 7-year-old. Use simple words, short sentences, everyday music examples. When you do this, something powerful happens. You force your mind to abandon complicated language, music, and search for clarity. That's the first shock, because as you try to simplify, you begin to uncover gaps that were hidden before. That feeling of "I think I know" disappears, and you see exactly where you don't. Music, it's uncomfortable, but it's liberating. You're no longer fooling yourself. Music, you're facing knowledge head-on. Imagine, for example, that you're learning fractions. Instead of starting with formal definitions, music, you take a pizza. You explain, if I cut it into 2 equal parts, each piece is 1/2. You didn't mention numerators or denominators, but you captured the essence. It's simple. Music, it's clear. It's memorable. And what happens here is extraordinary. When you translate the complex into the simple, your brain builds deeper music connections. Information stops being something distant and becomes part of your natural vocabulary. You may not realize it, but you are teaching yourself at the most fundamental level. This is the first step to forcing your mind to learn anything. Always begin by simplifying. Don't accept the illusion of complexity, because when you can explain something simply, it means you have truly begun to understand. Music. Now that you've simplified the concept, it's time to take the step that separates those who merely read from those who really learn. Teaching. Pay close attention here, because this is the secret. Teaching doesn't mean having a classroom, students, or music, a blackboard. Teaching means explaining out loud as if you were talking to someone curious who has never heard about the subject before. It could be a friend, music, your phone's camera, a mirror, or even an empty chair. The important thing is to turn thought into words. When you try to teach, something magical happens. The brain is forced to organize ideas in a logical sequence. And suddenly what seemed clear in your mind starts to fall apart. You hesitate, music, forget apart, can't find the right words. That moment is not music failure. It's the exact point where learning happened. It's the moment when the illusion of knowledge dissolves and your mind reveals its gaps. Music. Instead of running from this discomfort, dive into it. Every time you try to teach and realize you can't, you've received a gift. You've discovered the hole in your understanding. Music. And only when you see that hole can you fill it. Think about how children tell stories. They aren't afraid to stumble, invent words, or repeat themselves. And precisely because of that, they learn so fast. When you put yourself in that role, teaching something you don't yet fully master, you activate the same natural mechanism of accelerated learning. This is the second step. Teach in order to learn. The more you teach, the more you understand. Knowledge doesn't solidify inside your head through silent reading, but through the noise of your own music words. Speaking organizes, clarifies, and locks it in. Remember, music, you're not teaching to impress, you're teaching to discover, because with every explanation, your mind rebuilds itself, and what once seemed unreachable begins to music become part of you. You simplified, you tried to teach, and in the process, music, you found gaps. The next step is to return to the material, review it, and simplify again. This cycle is what forces your mind to transform information into true knowledge. Here's a practical example, Kasatsakin, music. Imagine you're learning about gravity. At first you write, gravity is the force that attracts bodies to one, music another, proportional to their mass and inversely proportional to the square of music, the distance. It sounds fancy. It sounds technical. But did you, music, really understand it? Now try to explain it to a child. Gravity is like an invisible magnet that pulls everything downward. The bigger the object, the stronger the pull. That's why the Earth keeps the moon orbiting music around it. Done. Instead of a complicated definition, you now have a simple mental image. Music. That is the power of review. You take what you couldn't explain well. Go back to the source. Find the new example. Swap difficult language for simple images and then try again. It's like polishing a rough stone until music, it becomes a diamond. And here's the key. Every time you review and simplify, your mind reorganizes itself. Music. What used to be fragile becomes solid. What used to be a memorized sentence becomes real understanding. You no longer rely on pairing because now you understand. This is the third step to forcing your mind to learn anything. Review music until you can explain it simply because only when you can say it in clear music words have you truly learned it. If you've simplified, taught, and reviewed, you're already far ahead of most people. But there's still a higher level creative repetition. It's not repeating for the sake of repeating. It's repeating in different ways as if you are playing with the knowledge. The brain loves variety. When you present the same idea from different angles, music, you build multiple connections. It's like reinforcing a bridge with many pillars. The more angles, the stronger the understanding. Here are clear examples. You learned about electricity. After simplifying and reviewing, tell the same explanation 3 ways. First, with wires and light bulbs, then by comparing it to water flowing through pipes, and finally by sketching it on paper. Each version locks in a different piece of the concept. Studying history, don't just recite dates, turn it into a story. A hungry people overthrowing an unjust king, the French Revolution. Then tell it as a stage play, then as a newspaper headline. Learning a language, explain the same sentence in different contexts. See the pattern? The content stays the same, but the form changes. Music. That shift forces the brain to create new links. The result, you don't just understand, you become able to use the knowledge in any situation. And here's the detail almost no one notices. When you play with learning, the brain treats it as pleasure. Music. Pleasure activates memory systems far more strongly than obligation. That's why children learn by playing. They're not just accumulating, they're enjoying. So the fourth step is this. Don't be a mechanical repeater. Be a creator of versions. Music. Each new way of explaining is a layer of cement that sets the knowledge permanently. But now pay close attention because there's a moment when many people quit. Music error. You try to simplify, explain, review, and you still stumble. The words don't come out. The logic slips. The explanation fails. Music. Most people take that as a sign of failure, but the truth is exactly the opposite. Error is the compass that points the way to real learning. Music. Think about it. When you make a mistake, it doesn't mean you know nothing. It means you found the exact point where your mind hasn't yet built a solid music bridge. And that's precisely that point where you hesitate, where your explanation breaks down, is exactly where your real work begins. The mistake is not a wall blocking your progress. It is a signal pointing you toward the weakness in your understanding. Instead of seeing error as failure, you can see it as guidance. The moment you get something wrong, you have discovered the precise location that needs strengthening. In that sense, the error is not the obstacle, it is the map. Imagine you are learning probability. You attempt to explain why the chance of flipping heads or tails on a coin is 50%. At first you confidently say, because there are 2 possible outcomes and one of them must occur. It sounds reasonable. It feels complete. but when you think a little deeper, you sense something missing. That explanation doesn't fully address why each outcome has equal likelihood. You begin to stumble. That stumble is powerful. It reveals that you don't yet understand the concept of independent events. So you return to the material. You learn that a coin has no memory. Each flip is independent of the last. The coin does not remember whether it previously landed on heads or tails. That is why the probability remains 50-50 every single time. When you come back and explain it again, your explanation becomes clearer and stronger. The original mistake forced you to refine your thinking. Without that moment of confusion, you might have stayed at a shallow level of understanding. Take another example. You try to explain photosynthesis. You talk about plants producing glucose and oxygen. You mention carbon dioxide and water, but you forget to include sunlight. Suddenly you realize something is missing. That discomfort, however small, pushes you to review the process again. You see how light energy drives the entire reaction. The next time you explain photosynthesis, you never forget to mention sunlight because the earlier mistake carved that knowledge deeper into your memory. The failure did not weaken you. It strengthened the neural pathway. Every mistake is a rehearsal for mastery. Each time you struggle while explaining, you generate raw material for improvement. Think of a sculptor working with stone. A wrong strike of the chisel is not wasted. It teaches the sculptor something about the material. With each correction, the shape becomes clearer. Eventually, a detailed figure emerges from what once looked like a rough block. Learning works the same way. When handled wisely, errors become tools that shape clarity. To use mistakes effectively, you must adopt a scientific attitude. Replace self-judgment with curiosity. Instead of thinking, "I'm bad at this," ask, "What exactly caused me to misunderstand this part? Was it a missing definition, a hidden assumption, a concept you skipped over too quickly?" When you analyze the cause of your error, you strengthen the very mental connection that was previously weak. The process of identifying and correcting mistakes deepens understanding far more than getting everything right the first time. This is a crucial step in powerful learning. Do not fear mistakes. Welcome them. They do not prove that you lack ability. They prove that you are stretching your limits. And true learning always happens at the edge of your comfort zone. If you never struggle, you are not pushing yourself far enough. Growth requires friction. Make a commitment to approach learning without limits. When you consciously decide that mistakes are part of progress, you change your internal dialogue. Instead of shrinking back from difficulty, you lean into it. That mindset alone can transform how you study and how quickly you improve. By now, you understand the path. Simplify complex ideas. Teach them in your own words. Review weak areas. Experiment creatively. And turn mistakes into stepping stones. These steps force your brain to reorganize information deeply instead of memorizing it superficially. But there is one more ingredient that cannot be ignored: hard work. Yes, technique matters. Yes, method matters. But without consistent effort, even the best strategy produces nothing. Your brain functions much like a muscle. If you never challenge it, it remains weak. It requires strain and resistance to grow stronger. No one becomes exceptional without discipline. Behind every so-called genius is a history of intense focus and sustained effort. The difference is that when you combine hard work with the right method, your effort stops being wasted. You are no longer spending hours mindlessly highlighting text or rereading pages without comprehension. Each attempt to explain strengthens your clarity. Each corrected mistake builds a firmer foundation. Each creative review session reinforces connections between ideas. Your effort becomes targeted and meaningful. Step by step, you progress. Concepts that once felt impossible start to feel manageable. With time, what seemed unreachable becomes familiar. You begin to realize that mastery is not a sudden leap, but a steady climb built on deliberate practice. In the end, the formula is straightforward yet powerful. Simplify the idea, teach it clearly, review what you don't understand, experiment and play with the knowledge, accept and analyze your mistakes, and above all, commit to disciplined effort. There is no secret shortcut. There is no magic trick. There is only a structured process combined with consistent work. When you truly commit to this approach, something shifts. Challenges stop looking like threats. They start looking like opportunities to expand. Your confidence grows because you know you have a reliable system. Even difficult subjects lose their intimidation factor because you trust your ability to break them down and rebuild them. A mind that is stretched by deep understanding never shrinks back to its previous size. Once you experience what it feels like to truly grasp a concept, not just memorize it, you won't want to return to shallow learning. The process becomes empowering. So here is your challenge. Choose a subject today. It can be anything: mathematics, history, coding, finance, a language, or a scientific concept. Take a blank sheet of paper. Write the topic at the top. Begin by simplifying it in your own words. Pretend you are teaching someone with no prior knowledge. Identify where your explanation feels weak. Review those areas. Try again. Play with examples. Test yourself. Welcome your mistakes and analyze them carefully. And repeat this process daily with discipline. Over time, you will notice something remarkable. Your speed of understanding will increase. Your retention will improve. Your confidence will strengthen. You will stop seeing limits where others do, not because you suddenly became more intelligent, but because you learned how to use your intelligence effectively. The true secret is not just studying harder. It is studying smarter while still working hard. It is engaging your brain actively instead of passively. It is transforming errors into insight and effort into growth. There are no fixed barriers for someone who combines intelligent strategy with disciplined action. When you approach learning this way, mastery is no longer a distant dream. It becomes the natural outcome of your process.